It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we're talking about Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. Would you like to do the plot or shall I?
Sure. So Helen is a magic-using person in a noir 1941 Chicago. She has sold her soul, and her 10 years before the devil comes to collect are about to be up when she is offered a chance to track down the White City vampire and possibly regain her soul.
Perfect. Yeah, it's a noir pastiche set in Chicago. Magical Chicago, basically just like regular Chicago, except with magic in 1941. And it is about sort of the backsliding of gay rights and a bunch of other things. But it is also just a sexy murder mystery.
Yes.
So,
are there wizards? Lesbians? Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes, they're definitely lesbians. And wizards, there's angels and demons.
There's also wizards. There's the Brotherhood of the Compass.
Oh yeah, no, those guys are a bunch of total fucking wizards.
Right. And they fight.
They do. Everybody gets in a little bit of a scrap with everybody else.
There's also angels and demons.
Yes. Why should you read this book?
It's a sexy noir murder mystery set in Chicago with lesbians.
Yeah, pretty much like if the description of, a mystical Chicago pizza as we were pitched on this one, she's solving mysteries, she's kissing dames, does everything that it says on the tin. If that sounds like a good plan to you, go for it.
I would say that the author does a fantastic job of capturing the voice and, crossing over just silly enough that it's enjoyable without it feeling, too silly with the noir voice.
Your mileage may vary on that.
It's very silly, but I don't know, I enjoyed it. It seemed to me that the author was having a lot of fun, and thus I was having fun with them.
Cool. Why shouldn't you read this book?
Well, it's very Christian. I mean, the author's, it's not a Christian narrative worldview, but it's a very Christian cosmology.
It is a very Christian cosmology, and it felt to me like there's some more or less consciously internalized Christian values going on here, which which will be interesting to discuss. For me, why you shouldn't read it, it's not very good. It's very short and yet it drags, which is a real trick to pull off. It's I mean, the noir thing is like you got a whole bunch of sort of, talk, right? Followed with brief bursts of action in it,
Yes.
But
the talk to action ratio is definitely off.
Yeah, it's missing some of the things that make that work in the original. But also just, it's I as we have both discussed, I have limited patience for pastiche. I
generally also have limited patience for pastiche, and I like this one slightly more on the reread, actually.
Interesting.
I read it a while ago. Yeah, no, exactly. The first time I was like, ugh, this is just yet another pastiche. On the reread, I thought it came off a little bit better. I think perhaps because I was, because I knew the end. Honestly, the plot was incredibly predictable, and if you can't figure out how it's going to end, within the first 15 pages, then you're a very different reader than I am.
Yeah, it's not really, the mystery isn't really the appeal here. The appeal is more the sort of the setting and the mood. And it's pretty much how much you're going to be charmed by that and by the narrative voice that'll determine whether you have a good time. So just read a few pages basically and see whether you like it based on that.
When I went in expecting to like it, I found it really annoying, and that was the first read. And then on the reread, when I went in already annoyed, I was like, oh, actually, this isn't so bad. So
cool. Yeah, no, it might be a calibration of expectations kind of a deal. It could be fun. And I will say this for it. It touches on a lot of interesting stuff.
Yes.
So I think that it's definitely a good podcast fodder. Content warnings. So we have grisly serial murder. We have possession. We have institutionalization and forced electroshock therapy, and basically a lot of sexism and homophobia that's more or less realistic for the time and place in the real world being described here. Anything I'm missing?
Not that I can think of. I mean, Christian hegemony.
Yeah, there's a lot. It's a very Christian hegemony kind of a book. And maybe that'll be the first thing that we talk about when we head off to the spoiler zone, which we could do now, unless I'm missing anything. We weren't missing anything. It's the spoiler zone now. Right. So yeah, no. I think that most of what I want to talk about in this book is about sort of noir, and about just sort of about the genre, and also about the sort of the religion. It feels like this. I mean, this book is written from a Christian perspective, and that's sort of an interesting thing, because this is another thing that I want to talk about.
But just to establish, this is very much in the author is dead. We don't know if the author is actually Christian.
Oh, I would bet upwards of $1 million that the author at least was Christian at one point.
Having read other books by the author, I'm slightly less convinced of that. But it doesn't matter because the author is dead.
The text is the text, and the author is dead, which is hard to remember when they're shouting at you, when they say they're not dead. And this is what I meant for imagination, 'cause the author is dead. Yes, it doesn't matter at all. But this book is part of the same tradition that Master of Jinn was part of. And even though Master of Jinn, obviously Islam rather than Christianity, but they both, I think, can trace their DNA back to Good Omens, wherein... No? Am I wrong?
I think that you might actually be wrong. I don't know. I actually think if I was going to trace their DNA back, it would be to Sandman. And like Good Omens and Sandman have some overlap.
In authorship, among other things.
In authorship, exactly. But the thing is that, no, I mean, Good Omens and Sandman have some overlap, but Good Omens has a more of a sense of humor about it. And Good Omens is playing with the tropes as opposed to just sort of building them into the world. And Sandman mostly, despite the fact that it's this, polytheistic, all religions are true kind of thing, still has a very Christian heaven and hell and souls for sale. Yeah.
It's a funny thing trying to do like all religions are right when you're also trying to include the religions which say that there is no other religion and that my God is the best God. Because inevitably, particularly if you happen to come from that tradition, you end up writing your God as being the best God. But the reason that I thought of it was that it is that element of the sense of humor. Because I was like, the difference between a book like this and a book like Good Omens is that Good Omens felt transgressive, right?
Right.
It felt, blasphemous. It felt playful. And when I was reading this, I was thinking, is it just like not possible to do that anymore? Like, have we now played out this angels and demons thing so much that there's no inherent transgressiveness to it anymore? Because this doesn't feel transgressive at all. Or is it a matter of approach?
I think it's a matter of approach. I think you can absolutely do transgressive stuff. It's just that I really think it's a matter of approach. Is that if what you want is to build, I mean, what this isn't even Good Omens, right? This is Milton. And yes. If you want to sort of build on, if you read Paradise Lost, or some piece based on Paradise Lost, and your takeaway is, wow, this is a cool setting, then it's hard to really transgress that. Good Omens, especially if you go back and read, the book as opposed to watch the Amazon thing, which I know you haven't done. But Good Omens is really mad at cultural Christianity. There's a whole thing making fun of televangelists.
This is true. Yeah.
So, and that's this, it seems like the narrative is angry at the inherent unfairness of this system, but it doesn't seem to take this, but it takes that system seriously.
Yeah. I mean, the sort of the most interesting thing about it is that our heroine starts damned and also ends damned. And she is damned first for the crime of loving her brother too much, and then damned second for the crime of loving her girlfriend too much.
And her brother, who she gets herself damned the first time to save, ends up himself damned for the crime of loving his sister.
Yeah, so it feels like, and those rules and the justness of those rules are never questioned, even by our hero herself. Like, she's mad that people judge her for it, but she's not taking issue with the hierarchy. With the rules that brought her to this pass.
Right. She's very much like, well, I made my deal. I knew what I was getting into.
Yeah. And it feels like it feels like the book is in some way, while, being pro-gay rights and, pro personal freedom in that respect, is also like being like, well, we're just going to have to work around the fact that it is actually a sin. The angel says that, we don't care, or the demon. I don't remember who says it. It's like, we don't care about, homosexuality.
The angel, I believe.
Yeah, it is the angel. It's like, we don't care about that. That's a human thing. But then, that is also a villain who says that.
No. It's the angel who's possessing her girlfriend.
That's right.
The thing is,
who's the good fallen angel.
I think you're being a little unfair, because I do think that this book is partly about, and this is something that Leora pointed out to me, and she's somebody who hates Christian narratives, but she pointed out that this is a book kind of about how can you make ethical choices in an inherently unethical system.
That is true.
And and the takeaway is that sometimes you're going to make, sometimes the choices you make, are morally right, even though the system is going to treat them as morally wrong. And the narrative takeaway here is that, and thus you have to live with that. I think, so I don't think that it's necessarily buying into this, idea that any of this stuff should be a sin. I think that it is sort of suggesting that in a just cosmology, this wouldn't be a sin, but it's not willing to look to, to suggest that it could, that, this cosmology is wrong. And that's where it feels very much like it's coming out of a Christian viewpoint, is that, it's not to get into like the whole stupid Tumblr fights about, cultural Christianity and atheism, but it's very much this idea that your options are Christianity or rejecting Christianity, but there's no other way. There's no other ethical system.
Yeah, no. This is incidentally a book which uses a lot of Hebrew angels, but doesn't know the Jews exist.
Yes.
But, what can
I was annoyed by this.
Yeah, and but also, like you said, yes, it is about trying to make the most ethical choices under an unethical system, and like the real world analog is like, okay, we are now living in a deeply homophobic and sexist world, which within living memory was less homophobic and sexist, which is accurate historically.
Yeah.
And, so how can we live under these circumstances? What are the choices that we make? Like, I'll continue to pursue my love and to do what I think is the right thing, despite what society, God, everything tells me to do. But the villains of the piece are the ones who are trying to cheat or alter the system, like the revolutionaries, essentially. So this book, the idea of this book is very much we will compromise and be, and like work within this order and make sacrifices, but we will not allow people to challenge the order.
Yes. And I mean, to be fair, the revolutionaries are themselves powerful people, and they don't so much... I wouldn't actually call them revolutionaries because, they're not necessarily trying to, I'm not entirely sure if the bad guy angel is trying to fix, the entire system, or if he just wants to get, back into heaven.
Yeah, I'm more thinking about sort of the dichotomy that is brought up, where it's like the good fallen angels, subsume themselves into a human and bind themselves to that human soul in a creepy, grooming way.
Yes.
And then sort of maybe ascend to heaven again, although we don't know, because it's by faith alone,
No, we do know, because Edith comes back from heaven and is like, oh yeah, I had to leave Heraniel there. Heraniel's happy, but I'm also happy to come back to you. So
that's really annoying, actually. They should have left that be by faith alone. We shouldn't have had that confirmed for us.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. They did, in fact, confirm it. But the bad demons are the bad fallen angels. Incidentally, it's really confusing to me that there are angels, fallen angels, and demons within this cosmology. But
yes,
maybe we can circle around to that.
Well, the thing is, there are midrash that do that, but the demons are shadim, which is a different thing. So
if we look at this from a Jewish perspective, the demons are probably shadim, children of Lilith. And they're probably just doing their own thing, part of the grand process. Really, the only thing out of place here is the fallen angels, who have clearly become too mortal and forgotten that they're automata, meaning to enforce the divine will. Sure, let's go with that. This would also explain why the demon resorts to punching at the end of the book. Shadim are not as powerful as they make themselves out to be. Yes. Now, I'm not saying that there is no precedent for this. I just don't understand how it works within the cosmology of this particular book. But the point being is it's the distinction between sort of passively going along and getting along and trying to do something active to essentially save yourselves. And it's like, I'm not, and they are aristocrats who are losing their positions of privilege. And the fact that the main baddie is incarnated as a Catholic priest is not an accident.
No.
But so that's more what I was thinking of. But yeah, I'm not calling the bad guy fallen angels, like, radical revolutionaries who want to topple the system. They just want to get back on top of it again.
Right. I was going to say, actually, there's a third Neil Gaiman work we can compare this to, which is Neverwhere. Well, among other things, the big villain is a fallen angel trying to get back into heaven.
Oh, of course. Of course it is. And it actually brought it to mind, reading this book, the scene from the TV version of Neverwhere, where the fallen angel in question creepily sings, "Heaven, I'm in heaven,"
Yes.
which is one of the best pieces of campy, cheesy TV that has ever been made.
Absolutely. It's the best moment in that entire TV series, honestly.
Yes, particularly how he ends it with Speak singing, "I'm in heaven." It's remained with me
after like chuckling
to this
evilly.
day.
Yeah, no, me too.
But yeah, no, that thanks for putting those two things together for me, because yeah, no, clearly there's Gaiman is all over this sucker.
Right, Gaiman is all over this sucker, and what it's funny because I believe Neil Gaiman is Jewish.
Gaiman has also said that he's as much a Scientologist as he is a Jew.
And the thing that, and Good Omens, which is the outlier here, is the one that has a Christian-raised atheist.
Yes. Sir Terry, of course, the humanist to Neil's wizard.
But yeah, it's just I don't know. I was just gonna say that it's, to me, it really did. It made the book less fun because it took away from the fun parts of the book. And honestly, the problem is that the moment for me of real pathos in this book has nothing to do with whether or not she's going to sacrifice her soul, especially because she's going to get her soul back, and she's going to trade it away to save her girlfriend. Like, pretty much that. Like, that's the obvious place this is going to go.
Yes.
But the real moment, the actual moment of pathos in here, is the one where she sees an old friend, where she's tracking down the case. She's at the asylum, and she makes eye contact with an old friend, and then like pretends not to have seen her.
Yes, the asylum scene, it really stood out to me for a number of different reasons. One of which was that it was a dive into like real horror.
Yes.
Like away from the really sort of campy faux horror of the rest of it.
Right, which I think was a good choice because it would have been really awful to read an asylum scene that was, very campy noir.
That is true on the one hand, and on the other hand, it sort of gets into my general problem with the book, which has to do with noir generally, right? Because the thing about noir is that it's in noir stories, like the plot unfolds pretty slowly. Nothing much happens. There's a lot of talking, but particularly there's a lot of introspective monologuing, and the sort of the hallmarks of the real classic noir detective stories are that they work because of two things. One of which is like really over the top bravura prose styling.
Yes.
And the other being really sort of fine attention to detail in the descriptive elements.
Yes.
This particular book isn't really up to either of those.
Though I think it's not bad at the beginning. The descriptive elements at the beginning aren't bad. It's just that then the author seems to get bored with doing the noir part and wants to move on to the plot.
Yes, which is a problem because we still get the noir pacing, but instead it's just repeating stuff that we already know at that point.
Right, like I would much rather hear the overwrought description of like drinking amazing coffee. And like that was much more fun than a lot of the stuff that comes later.
Yeah, it sort of went downhill kind of after that point. But where I really missed it was in the asylum scene. Not that I would want it to be treated like, it was, a cartoon, but in that I would have liked to get a sense of what it was like in the asylum.
That's true. There's a real flinch.
Yeah, she sort of floats into it. There's no description of what the building is like. There's no description of like what is actually happening inside for the most part. We see some characters as sort of through a glass darkly, because, and part of it is, as you say, like it's her point of view. She doesn't want to pay attention to this.
Right.
And like the paucity of her description around it makes sense for her. But like as a reader, I was like, this is the most interesting part of this book. I want to actually know that you did your research, and I want you to evoke the horror of what this was actually like, you know?
Well, and the thing is, I think that part of the problem is not only that the character is flinching away from the descriptions, but also that the story flinches away. So she makes eye contact with this woman she knows from like the underground lesbian bar, and she knows that this woman is clearly in here for her family has kidnapped her and dumped her in this terrible place for being a lesbian, and then the woman just sort of shuffles off, and she feels relief, and she never returns to that thought again.
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting moral thing, right? Because the part of the whole "I'm damned" thing is that our character knows that she's a bad person and has accepted that she's a bad person. You know, she doesn't have a soul, and and this is part of the noir thing, is like that she accepts that she has to be a bad person to live and work in the on the fringes of society where she has been of necessity placed.
Yes.
But she sort of deals with that by not thinking about it, which is weirdly enough not how the noir detectives,
right. The noir detectives really dwell on how wretched they are. Like, this is why you always get the scene. You always get the scene where they get beaten up for sticking their nose where it doesn't belong, which she doesn't get.
Which is a shame.
I know, right? She should have got. There should have been the thing where somebody finds her in a dark alley and tells her that she shouldn't be sticking her nose in these things and beats her up, and then you get the description of how awful she feels. Like, that's.
I mean, Calvin and Hobbes got that part in the newspaper. You could have put it in here.
But you're like, this doesn't. Despite the fact that the main character is damned, the book doesn't want anything bad to happen to her, and nothing really bad ever does. I mean, yes, theoretically she's going to hell, but her brother will be there. She won't be alone.
And like the implication is that she'll figure out a way to skate another 10 years the next time, and so on.
And like every injury is healed immediately.
Yes, it's a no stakes kind of a book.
Right, and every major emotional moment is sort of flinched away from.
Right, it's another one of those ones where the hero is sort of magically insulated from the real bad stuff, which is why, again, the asylum scene stuck out so much, because there's no implication that she herself might end up there. Because who's going to put her there,
Right, because she doesn't have... Right, which could have been this really great moment, because nobody's going to put her there because she doesn't have family who speaks to her anymore. Right. In fact, she doesn't have parents anymore. She just has a brother who, loves her but isn't speaking to her. And
now, if the brother had been more of a bastard, and had maybe threatened to institutionalize her,
right?
Or
even if the brother's friend had done that and the brother had been mealy-mouthed about it.
Right, exactly. I feel like that this book was kind of afraid to go all the way.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of pussyfooting, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I think that's a totally fair critique.
Can we do Grumpy Zone so I can share
Sure,
a few?
let's jump straight into the Grumpy Zone. I feel like we're already kind of in the Grumpy Zone, so.
I don't really remember why I was so down on this book. There are just like a couple of in addition to the sort of the broader stuff that we've talked about, there are a couple of things that irk me here. If you're going to have one black character in your book, do not make him a magical elevator operator named Amos, please.
I think I do wonder if that's deliberate, because I'm pretty sure the author is black.
Okay, that's fine then. I mean, why though? Why would you do that and not lampshade it?
I mean, I think that it's supposed to be somewhat lampshaded, but...
Oh, man. Okay. That's interesting. But I didn't know the author was
right, because you have the audiobook.
And, the author is dead.
Because you have the audiobook, so the author's photo isn't at the end.
Yeah, and the narrator of the audiobook wasn't I don't know. Maybe they were black, but they gave him black voice.
Oh, that's a choice.
Yep, it is. So, well, I'll say like that just felt very strange to me. Just sort of as maybe as a minor detail in amongst all the other things, but it's like, again, this character is only focused on herself really, and not on the larger, strictures that she's living under, largely because, she's mostly focusing on survival, and that makes sense. Oh, the text is the text, and the author is dead, which is particularly hard to remember when you're a white person trying to tell a black person how they'll deal with race. So I'll just keep pretending that the author has no face. It's unfortunate that there has to be like bloodline magic. We didn't need that. We didn't need the Nephilim stuff.
Oh yeah. I know.
It's just like, it's so lazy. And it's like, it gave the whole thing a sort of a conservative vibe, which also sort of the casual misogyny of the dyke detective did.
And also, again, the whole Christian worldview.
Yes. And
where like, no, everybody accepts that sin is real.
Indeed.
And also, like, sin is real and indelible.
And finally, like, I want to know what the deal is with the demons and why they're not the same as the fallen angels. What they're doing with selling people's souls, at a crossroads for, like, giving Robert Johnson the blues kind of stuff. And, maybe associating Amos the Black Elevator, ferryman with the coin with her is, part of that. But there was so much, like, this book was so short, and yet there was so much more room in it. Like, this was a short story's worth of stuff. You could have given us more about that. And, like,
I don't know. I think I mean, for one thing, she does tell the narrator, does tell us, or no, the demon, Merlot, tells us exactly why they use souls, which is that they can do all sorts of really powerful magic. Or maybe the angel does. One of them does.
Yeah, the angel does. The devil never talks about what the devil's.
Oh, that's true. The devil.
Is.
That's true. The devil's actually, keeps things pretty close. But the angel specifically says, "Oh, well, all these things that I can't really do anymore with the power of a soul, I totally could." So, like, souls are just, it's just magical fossil fuels.
But the thing that the reason that I mention that is because I found it particularly galling that during the final encounter, where we have to do a bunch of contrived stuff to make it, even Stevens, the devil's contribution ends up being getting into a physical fight with an angel, just like scrapping around on the ground, which is, again, very funny, but I don't know if it was supposed to be.
Yeah, and it didn't really work because, the devil, her entire thing is that she's, like, super sleek. She's, the perfect, noir femme fatale. And you if you're going to go into the humor of, like, the femme fatale and this angel in the body of a Catholic priest slugging it out, then again, it needs more detail.
Exactly. Although it was, in fact, the angel in the body of the cop that she was slugging it out with.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It was the climax, everything happened at once, and it wasn't particularly clearly narrated for me.
Yes.
I was mostly just, passing time until the inevitable.
Indeed. The thing that really turned me against this book was the sort of, Nephilim, genetic power, indigo children.
No, that was definitely the moment that it lost me. And also because by that point, the book has stopped doing the things I enjoyed, which were really leaning into the noir. Like, it's something I don't normally like noir pastiche, but I actually liked the noir pastiche more than I liked the sort of Milton pastiche.
Yes. No, I agree. So maybe we can talk about noir a little bit. Noir talk. So noir is a very, very gendered genre. Like,
Yes.
The general noir thing is, what, like the noir scene that everybody makes fun of is that, the hard-boiled detective is sitting in his office with his gun and his booze and his suicidal ideation. And then a woman walks in. Yeah, the femme fatale walks in with her legs up to, an arbitrary point and is described in exquisite detail, and then turns out to be a fallen angel, basically, right?
Right.
That, women, like the Madonna horror is like enormous in like an enormous presence in noir fiction, because it's like, there are definitely the good women and the bad women, and the bad women are like always the most dangerous characters.
Partly because they're the sexiest.
Exactly. So I'm just interested in how does having a lesbian in the role of the masked detective change that? Or how does...
Well, part of the problem is that, again, the book doesn't want to commit, right? Because you get your description of your femme fatale as Marlowe, but at no point is she ever actually into Marlowe. Like, she's like, oh yes, super hot, but she can't feed sparrows out of her hand like my girlfriend can.
My Disney princess girlfriend.
Right. Like, the thing is that part of the point of the femme fatale is that she makes you make bad choices because she's so hot and you have nothing to live for anyway.
Right.
But the thing is that despite being damned and about to die in 48 hours, Helen has so much to live for, and she's never actually tempted by the dame. She's tempted. She's got her girlfriend, and she's loyal to that, and she has too much to live for it to really, for it to be just her alone with the suicidal ideation and the the booze and the gun.
Yes, and one of the reasons that frustrates me is because I would have, if we were going, show me a pastiche and I'll ask for a deconstruction, right?
Right.
That's just me. I want to gobble something up and, see other things gobbled up and see how they work. But, sometimes you can just do the deconstructing yourself. It's like, I feel like this book brought up a lot of interesting stuff without really examining a lot of said interesting stuff. And but in that case, I want to be able to have a discussion about, noir and the politics of noir and the gender politics of noir. But this book doesn't go into any of those. And that's a shame, because it would be weird. It would be interesting to see how what the misogynist tendencies of the dyke detective would be, apart from calling everybody doll and dame and stuff,
Right. Yes.
I just
yes,
I just want to see
that's
that,
a place for deconstruction. And I can understand why, and this is actually something that kind of both annoys me, but also I understand in a lot of queer fiction these days. It's very much everybody else gets their trashy entertainment. Why can't we just have our trashy entertainment plus the gay, plus gay? Trashy entertainment, but they're lesbians, or they're gay men, or they're trans, or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Make it trashier then.
Right. Well, that's part of the thing is that, just make it trashier. But also at the same time, the thing is that these don't, it's not that I expect queer stuff to inherently need to be more progressive and more deconstruction-y, but I felt like it was a real missed opportunity to have a story where you're clearly setting up, these parallels between this Christian system of sin and social homophobia, right? She doesn't come out to her parents, to her family as a lesbian and get kicked out. She sells her soul and gets kicked out, but she's still a teenage lesbian who just got kicked out of the family.
Right. No, we
is homeless.
Surely we agree that that's meant to be her being damned for that, or her being damned is meant to be an analog for her being queer, in this instance.
Exactly. But the problem, and I can understand also wanting the story to be, you know, in the analog, she is damned, but in her queerness, actually, you know, you could actually show her queerness being part of this happy, affirming relationship. But part of the problem is happy, affirming relationships don't really work very well in noir.
Yeah.
And part of it is that I think a problem that a lot of this ex-but lesbians can fall into when it's, why can't we also have our trashy fun? Why can't we also have our fluff? Is that they don't want anything bad. This is coming back to what we said at the beginning. They don't want anything bad to happen to the main character. So the lesbian relationship has to be healthy. The lesbian can't ever really get hurt.
Yeah, you know, we would be burying, if we left Edith in hell or in heaven, if we left Edith in heaven, we would be burying our gays, and we're not allowed to do that, you know?
Right.
So it's got to be a big happy family at the beginning and at the end, you know? And it's like, there was also like in the first, you know, and I agree with you that like the first part of the book is the best part of the book. The first part of the book also seems to be setting up this moral dilemma about, okay, well, do I tell my girlfriend that I'm going to have to go to hell now? You know,
right.
You know, how am I going to negotiate the moral dilemma of, you know, fooling her about this and while at the same time pursuing my own agenda and blah, blah, blah. And it's like another thing that keeps happening in books like this, which is beginning to annoy me, is that the main character is absolved of all of the difficult, potentially complicated decisions where there are no right answers by circumstance.
Yes.
And in this case, also, like, it turns out that the girlfriend knew all the time for magic reasons and was okay with it all the time, despite not actually talking to her about it for some fucking reason. What kind of lesbian rep is this supposed to be? They give up an ample opportunity to process their feelings. And so...
Right, which really makes the girlfriend look worse.
It really does.
Because if the girlfriend has this mind-reading thing and is able to just constantly pick up that she's constantly fretting about how do I tell her, how do I not tell her, just say, sweetie, you're thinking really loudly. I know what your secret is. Let's sit down and process.
Right, exactly. And, you know, maybe I can, with my connections, I can maybe try to help you get out of this potentially. But no, that wouldn't be very good, girl, to do that, because that would be against the big rules. So,
right. Which is also another frustrating thing, is that Edith gets basically no agency throughout. Like, she spends the entire, you know, first she gets to be a beautiful cinnamon roll, and then she gets to be, and then, you know, it turns out she's a little bit more complicated because she's been carrying this angel around. But, you know, this angel, despite being a fallen angel, is actually a good angel, and they're best friends. And then she dies, and then she gets brought right back from heaven.
Yes.
Like, she doesn't actually make any meaningful choices in the entire book.
And I do want to circle back. I said that she was groomed by the angel, but which is very much what happened here. Like, the angel is, you know, she had to like choose. Like, the angels make a big deal out of, you know, voluntary hosts rather than involuntary hosts.
Right, but this is like her imaginary childhood friend. Right, her imaginary childhood playmate is like, so actually I'm real, and can I you know, possess you?
And this is also like the demons do the same thing. You know, one of the murder victims was 25 years old, you know, which means that 10 years ago when she sold her soul, she would have been 15. And it's like, fine, that's demon behavior. But I would have liked that to have been mentioned.
Yes. Yeah, because it's true that, like, you know, there's a slight undercurrent of smugness to Helen's, you know, narration when she's looking at all the other people, because all the other people, she's like, oh, well, you know, they did their things for, you know, for fame and money and you know, and marriage to a guy who didn't even notice you before you sold your soul.
Right.
But, you know, again, these were either people who were really poor, or they were vulnerable young women / teenagers.
or they were gay men who wanted enough.
Oh, that's right. They were gay men who wanted security for their boyfriend.
Exactly. And again, I think that is part of what, like, the larger intent, is that looking at reasons why people would, go outside of the structures of society or survive under bad circumstances. I just felt like I would have liked more exploration of what that looks like and what that means, and maybe this is the sort of book where it's like the author is perfectly happy to let you do that work. But, I just would have liked there to be more in the actual story,
Honestly, I would have liked there to be more, because she doesn't really even ever have to do detective work. She sees the first, and I think that this was probably a deliberate choice to avoid this is obvious to everybody else, but not obvious to the main character.
Sure.
And making the main character stupid. But she doesn't, the first story falls into her lap. She immediately makes the connection, and then she just gives you a quick rundown of what all the other stories are to be like, in case you missed the point.
Yes. And yeah, no, I think that the book wants you to know that the central mystery isn't really the point, because again, it's very easy to figure out. Even I, who am not, the same kind of like cracking the case before everybody else reader that you are, was not surprised at any juncture by anything that happened here.
I'm not so much necessarily cracking the case. It's just there's specific narrative tropes that you can kind of read. Like when a book is called Even Though I Knew the End, and it's about somebody who has already sold her soul once, trying to get her soul back.
2 title drops over the course of a very short book. Come on.
Yes.
But yes. Anyway, so yeah, I feel like I'm probably going harder on a relatively light and fluffy book, and again very short, which we always like, than it necessarily deserves. But I mean, this is the podcast. We're going to do interpretive shit to books. We wouldn't have had a lot to say, I think, about this book if we hadn't gone this direction. So, thank you for recommending it regardless, I should say.
Yeah, no,
I think I had a lot of fun, like, being angry about it.
I wasn't nearly so angry about it, but, it's always fun to pick these things apart. And again, I think if you know what it is going in, well, the first half is still way better than the second half. But, if you know what it is going in and you already understand that stuff in there is going to annoy you, you can have fun with it. Agreed.
And it's like, it is not as good as Master of Jinn, but it is much shorter. And that counts for a lot.
It does. And I will just say on a final note that if you really want more lesbian noir in your life, the 1980s computer game Caper in the Castro is available for free online.
I mean, yes, this is history. You should absolutely do that. I haven't done it, but you
should absolutely. You can play it in an afternoon, and you get to play the lesbian detective Tracker McDyke searching for her lost drag queen friend.
I mean, sounds great. Sounds more intersectional than a lot of the stuff that we read. All right. So next time, according to the list, we've shuffled everything to create more mini arcs. So the sequels to The Outside are next. And until then, thank you for listening.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. When they're talking about moving to San Francisco, the characters mention that Chicago is where they can afford to live, and that gives me an excuse to sing you a couple of verses from one of my favorite songs. Well, we had a mouse right in our house, and we're afraid to move. But I'd never trade that time we spent huddled up in the front room. No chill or rats or poverty can quell my love for you. or for this dump we're standing in, 'cause this is my home too. Chicago, Chicago, where there's assholes everywhere. Chicago, Chicago, where you're 15 pints from all your cares, where your wallet's like a sieve, and that's where all of the gangsters live. Chicago, Chicago, it's where we can afford to live.